I stopped setting 6 places at home after Henry passed. The plates felt too loud. But for the reservation, I still said 6. It was supposed to be formal, public. A Christmas dinner with cloth napkins, low light, and no excuses for eating early. I chose Leonside Manor because the chairs don't squeak, and the silverware is heavier than it needs to be. The last time we were there, Henry had called it the kind of place that expects you to know who you are. I liked that. The cards I made were hand-cut, just cardstock folded clean. Caroline's name in green ink because she says red is too seasonal. Grant's in all caps. He once claimed it reads stronger that way. Brian's slanted slightly, the only way I could get the marker to stop bleeding. Lily's had a silver sticker in the corner. She likes things that shine. I didn't make one for myself. The calls didn't come all at once. They staggered, like a sequence timed for plausible deniability. At 2:04, Caroline's name lit up. Her voice was clipped and deliberate. Lily's got a little congestion. Nothing serious, but we figured it's better to keep her home. There was no background noise, just stillness. You understand, right? We didn't want to risk spreading anything to you. She didn't ask how I was. At 2:17, Grant called. Big client mess. Quarter's ending weird. We've got a window to land this, and if I'm not on site, well, I'd rather not explain that to a boardroom. A pause. Then softer, like an afterthought. We'll do something next week. You know, small, just us. The phrase just us didn't have a shape anymore. At 2:42. Brian. Total nightmare. Battery's dead. I'm waiting on roadside, but you know how it goes. His voice was casual, too casual. The kind people use when they're lying to someone who's already figured it out. I didn't want to leave you hanging. I know you planned a lot. He didn't say sorry. None of them did. I still got dressed. Gray silk blouse, pearl buttons, 2 of them chipped. The coat I wore had Henry's gloves still in the pocket-thin leather, worn soft at the palms. I pressed the seat cards into my clutch so the ink wouldn't smear. The Bordeaux was already paid for. I'd requested the 2012, the one Henry said always tasted slightly unfinished, like a story that didn't know how to end. The maitre d' remembered me. He always does. Table for 6. Mrs. Whitaker, I nodded. Would you prefer something smaller? A more intimate setting? I looked at the long oak table. Linen pressed tight. Candles not yet lit. No. Keep it. I reserved for family. He bowed slightly. The kind of bow that says he won't ask again. The name cards went down as rehearsed. Caroline to my left, Grant across Brian beside the window. Lily's by the end, where she liked to swing her feet. A peppermint for her already unwrapped. I ordered the wine. The waiter poured only 1 glass, paused before pouring the others, and didn't say a word. I took a sip. It was warm already. The glass held fingerprints that weren't mine. At 5:17, I saw them. Romanelli's across the street. Bright. No candles, just overhead lighting and heavy laughter. The kind that feels manufactured like applause in a sitcom. Caroline sat closest to the window. She was wearing the pearl pin I gave her when Lily was born. Grant was gesturing with 2 hands telling some story. Brian leaned over to cut Lily's food. She was wearing antlers, glittering. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. They weren't hiding. They weren't afraid. The waiter returned. Would you like to begin with the salad? I shook my head. Just the wine. He nodded, disappeared into silence. The bread cooled in its basket. The butter held knife marks no one would smooth. The silver shone where it wasn't touched. In front of Caroline's seat, I noticed a drop of red wine or wax, I couldn't tell. It had already dried. I unfolded the napkin at Brian's place. Folded it again. Set it beside the card and pushed both closer to the edge of the table. not far enough to fall. Somewhere near dessert, the party at Romanelli's began taking photos. Brian held the phone. Caroline adjusted Lily's hair. Grant looked down at something, probably a bill. None of them looked my way. Or maybe they did, and I didn't notice, which felt worse. The glass in my hand was almost empty. I didn't refill it. I placed the stem down gently, not wanting to hear the sound. I took each name card and turned it face down. Not all at once. One after the other. Slowly. As if giving each name permission to be unspoken. When the waiter returned again, he didn't ask anything. He took the unused cutlery, lifted the basket of bread. He paused at Lily's peppermint. Shall I know? Leave it. He left the mint, a small, untouched sweetness in the middle of the table. I didn't call them. I didn't message. The phone buzzed once, spam, likely, but I didn't turn it over to check. My name in the reservation book would be crossed out by morning. Their names never made it in. The check came in a leather folder. I slipped the tip in quietly. The waiter bowed once more. Outside, the cold didn't sting. The wind moved through me like I wasn't something solid. Across the street, the Romanelli party was winding down. Caroline hugged Lily from behind. Grant threw his coat over his shoulder. Brian pulled out his car keys. I turned away. At home, I didn't take off the blouse. I poured a glass of water and left it full on the nightstand. The house was as I left it. No coats on the rack, no voices in the hallway, just the faint scent of cedar and Henry's gloves still in my coat pocket. I sat on the edge of the bed and reached for the folded cards in my purse. They were still warm. Or maybe I just imagined that. I didn't unfold them. I didn't need to. I never liked raising my voice. It made me feel like I was already losing. When Caroline asked to move the wedding from our backyard to a hotel ballroom, I told her I'd handle the cancellation. The garden had taken me months to prepare Henry's favorite jasmine, fresh white gravel, along the path the arbor wrapped in linen. She walked the space, once stopped beside the pond, and pulled her sunglasses down with 2 fingers. It's a bit precious, don't you think? Let's not make it about the past. She smiled when she said it. I nodded and made the calls. The string quartet sent a polite refund denial. The florist let me apply the deposit toward a funeral package. I didn't mention that. When Grant asked for access to one of the savings accounts, it was after Thanksgiving dinner. I was clearing dishes. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed the way he used to wait when he was 10, and asking for extra dessert. Nothing big, just the rainy day account. There's a great investment opening up, and Aaron's parents already chipped in. You wouldn't want me to look like the only one who didn't believe in our future. Right, I didn't ask questions. I just handed him the extra checkbook the next morning, tucked inside an envelope with his name on it. The envelope came back unopened in the mail 2 months later, address crossed out. I didn't ask why. With Brian, it was quieter. He didn't ask for things directly. He visited less, left faster, always checking his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. I found a pawn shop slip one Sunday while folding laundry tucked inside the pocket of his old coat, the one he said he'd borrowed just to remember Dad's scent. The slip listed a silver locket, a commemorative coin set, and a watch I hadn't noticed missing until that moment. He came by a week later to return the coat. Didn't mention the slip. I held it in my hand, but I didn't say anything. That coat's too warm for me anyway. Makes me sweat. He looked away. Don't worry, I didn't ruin anything. I smiled. I didn't check the pockets again. There was a time I would have asked where he spent Christmas last year. He'd said something vague, we're keeping it low-key this time. You know how it is. I nodded then too. I used to think nodding was a kind of love. Henry's last birthday was at the house. I printed our wedding photo, black and white, taken on a day that had started with rain and ended with sun. I placed it on a small easel at the head of the table next to a scrapbook I'd made snapshots, postcards, letters from his deployments, things no one else remembered. Caroline brought cupcakes from a new bakery. She clinked her glass, raised one to the ceiling, and said, "To Dad for raising a daughter who never settles." Everyone clapped. No one opened the scrapbook. Later that night, I noticed someone had dropped frosting on the corner of our wedding photo. I wiped it clean with the edge of my sleeve. I didn't tell them about the photo, or that I'd pressed Henry's medals into the back cover of the scrapbook, just in case someone wanted to take it home. No one did. The restaurant dinner last week was supposed to be different. I planned for presents. 6 name cards folded with care. Bordeaux pre-ordered. A peppermint for Lily. My own name left off the table as always. When they canceled each with their own calm, practiced reasons, I still went. I still asked the waiter to light the candles. I still told him not to move the table. I still watched them eat across the street. When I returned home, I found the table untouched. I didn't bother unzipping the dress. I poured myself a glass of water and sat in Henry's chair. The scrapbook was on the shelf, unopened since his last birthday. I ran my hand along the spine. A faint layer of dust clung to the edge. Later, I found the envelope Grant had never opened. I pressed it flat again and placed it under the scrapbook. The next morning, I folded the napkins I'd brought home from the restaurant, unused white, still faintly smelling of wine. I kept them. That evening, I returned to the restaurant alone. The maitre d' looked up. "Mrs. Whitaker, did you forget something?" I shook my head. "No, I just wanted to confirm I made the reservation for the right place. The wrong decade, perhaps, but the right place." He smiled politely, but didn't ask what I meant. I didn't explain. There was a table still set from the afternoon rush. The bread had gone hard at the edges. The butter curled from the cold. I stood there for a moment and looked at the silverware misaligned. One of the knives had been dropped, left slightly askew. I adjusted it. Then I turned and walked out. At home, I opened the scrapbook, not all the way, just enough to see the first page. Our wedding invitation faded, but still legible. My name beside his. It looked more permanent there than it ever had aloud. I closed it without turning the next page. Not everything needs to be remembered out loud. Some truths don't arrive with thunder. They come wearing borrowed shoes and holding envelopes that never belonged to them. I recognized the knock before I reached the door. Not by rhythm, but restraint. Eli always knocked like he was apologizing in advance. He stood there, breath fogging into the quiet between us, holding a thick white envelope with both hands, creased once down the middle, like someone had hesitated folding it. I let him in without speaking. He didn't offer a greeting. Just set the envelope down on the table carefully, as if it contained something that could still shift its weight. "They told me not to come here. Caroline said let her sit in it. That's what she likes, ceremony and silence." He didn't sit. He kept his hands in his coat sleeves. The edge of one cuff was unraveling. They had a meeting at Romanelli's last night. No one was supposed to bring documents. I saw Grant hand this to Mom under the table. She left it in the booth when she got up. I was bussing glasses. I pulled a chair out slowly. The envelope felt warm from his grip. I opened it. The first page bore Henry's name and the stamp of our family lawyer in the upper right corner. Dated a year before the stroke. A will. A clean copy. "To my wife, Barbara Whitaker, I leave all holdings in entirety. If she is deceased or deemed legally incapacitated, her share will be divided equally among all direct biological grandchildren. Not children. Not family. Grandchildren. Specifically." The second page was medical. A lab logo in blue. 2 identifiers. Sample A, Caroline Moore. Sample B, Eli Carter. Result, non-maternal match. Probability of relatedness, 0.00%. I was told I belonged here. He sat now, gently, as if he didn't trust the chair. She used to say I was her cousin's kid. Dead cousin. Dead parents. I stopped asking. He reached into his jacket and took out a pen, set it beside the envelope like an offering. I wasn't going to say anything. But Brian laughed last night. He said, "If the old woman goes, we split it 2 ways. The boy doesn't count." Then Caroline said, "3. Don't forget me. I'm the reason we have a case at all." I didn't speak. I looked down at the folded corner of the will. It had a smudge. Could have been oil. Could have been something else. Eli watched my hand trace it. "She told me not to call you Grandma in public." He was barely audible now. "She said it made you look desperate, like you needed someone to claim you." I remembered the photo on the mantel. Eli, 6 years old, sitting beside Henry at the garden table. No one told them to pose that way. Henry had placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. Eli had smiled with both rows of teeth. I used to think something was wrong with me. That's why she didn't hug me the way she did Lily. That's why Grant always double-counted the Christmas envelopes before handing them out. I smoothed the paper beneath my palm. It crinkled once, then settled. She kept receipts for everything she ever gave me. Once, I asked for $20 for a field trip. She wrote loan in the memo line of the check. His voice cracked, but not from tears. From where? He'd been holding his throat too long. "I'm not here to take anything. I just didn't want to lie by omission. If they're going to try something, I figured you should know." I stood and opened the side drawer, removed a blue ink pen with a cracked barrel. Henry's. He used it to sign the refinance papers, then forgot it in the pocket of his church coat. The crack came from the dryer. I placed it beside Eli's pen. "They're building a case, aren't they?" His chin dropped once, not quite a nod. "They think if you don't respond, it's because you can't. They're just waiting long enough to make it legal." He looked at the window then, as if trying to decide if he was still visible. I heard Caroline say, "She's already halfway gone. We'll just light a few candles, make a tribute post, and move on." I sat again, pushed the envelope toward the center of the table. "You knew this wasn't what they wanted. You came anyway." He didn't answer right away. He looked at the blue pen, then at mine. Both pens, side by side, different in color. Same length, now that one had cracked. "You're the only one who ever called me yours without checking who else was listening." He wiped his palm on his jeans quietly. "I brought this because I needed to be sure that someone at least once had loved me without a transaction." I didn't touch his hand. I didn't speak into his relief. Instead, I watched the light begin to flatten across the glass. It was the kind of brightness that doesn't reach you, just outlines the dust. I looked at the reflection, waiting to see the vague silhouette I'd come to expect. But it wasn't there. In its place, a sharper figure, back straight, face clear. Not mine. Not really. Just someone sitting upright, fully seen. I didn't speak. I didn't fold the documents or move the pens. I let them sit there perfectly still. Proof of what had always been beneath the surface, not betrayal, but design. And I realized I wasn't the one who'd disappeared. I had simply been waiting long enough to become visible. Some things don't scream when they break, they click softly into place. I hadn't touched Henry's cufflinks since the funeral. They stayed in the wooden box he carved himself, the one with the lid that never sat flush. That morning I turned one over in my hand while waiting outside Edgar Lowell's office. The initials were faint now. HW. The W nearly rubbed away. He didn't offer condolences. Just pushed a folder across the desk and said, almost as an afterthought, Henry asked me to keep this sealed unless you were left out or something smelled wrong. There were 3 items inside. The first was a voice recording. Edgar leaned forward and pressed play on a small gray recorder I hadn't seen since the 90s. Mom doesn't need to know the fine print. She trusts us. Caroline. The same clipped tone she used when she corrected waiters or spoke to teachers who dared give Lily a B+. She gets overwhelmed. Let's just walk her through the forms and smile. She won't question a thing. Then Grant, if she asks, we say it's tax-related. Nobody wants a mess later. The tape stopped. Edgar didn't comment. He handed me a second envelope. Inside was a flash drive. He slid his laptop over. The screen flickered. Then came the grainy footage from the care facility's hallway camera, a timestamp. Henry's final week. Brian stood by the bedside holding a clipboard. He wasn't looking at me or her, just at the pen in her hand. You've already read this, remember, it's just a formality. Barbara myself, on-screen blinking slowly. The kind of blinking that's not quite awake. The kind Henry used to call dream walking. The pen moved. A signature followed. The nurse walked in 30 seconds later, holding a small paper cup. Too soon, she muttered. Brian turned his face away from the camera, but his hand was already collecting the form. Edgar closed the laptop. His eyes didn't meet mine. He handed over a third item, stapled printouts. Your husband anticipated this. He updated his will when the children started making unexpected withdrawals. But more than that, he left a trigger clause. If any of them moved to contest or manipulate the estate, this would come into effect. At the top of the paper was Caroline's name bolded and underlined. Filing petition for limited conservatorship. Claim cognitive decline, inability to manage financial affairs attached, was a psychological evaluation. Not signed by a doctor. Dated the week after Henry died. She's not all there anymore. She forgets things. She cries randomly. She talks to photographs. Statement from Caroline Moore. Another form, power of attorney conditional. Executed by Brian Whitaker. Witnessed by Grant Whitaker. I flipped the last page over and found an email, Grant's name in the header addressed to a law firm I didn't recognize. Subject, urgent, body. We need to move fast. If she regains capacity and signs anything new, the window closes. We lose leverage. No punctuation at the end. I remember once Henry refused to lend Grant money without a repayment plan. Grant shouted in the kitchen, "If you're not going to help your own son, then just say it." I'd put my hand on Henry's shoulder. He hadn't flinched. But afterward, he walked into the garage and stood there for 20 minutes with the radio on tuned to static. Edgar spoke again, but I heard it only in pieces. They've overplayed their hand. The documentation here, it's enough. I shook my head once, not in denial, just to keep the air from closing in. They've prepared statements, lined up assessments, maybe even doctors willing to sign. He pushed a final envelope toward me, labeled in Henry's handwriting. To be delivered if she is forced into silence. I can file this. It'll stop them. I didn't take it. Not yet. I stared at the cufflink on the table between us. HW almost gone. At home, I made tea with the last of the loose Darjeeling Henry liked. The leaves settled too fast, clumping near the edge of the mug. I sat at the table with the documents unopened beside me. The house was too quiet, not the kind that invites rest, but the kind that listens. I ran a finger over the folded edge of Grant's email. The corner had bent backward during copying, a small triangle missing. They hadn't simply shut the door. They had changed the locks, drawn the curtains, and listed the house. Not metaphorically, I found the listing later that night. My home. Labeled pending conservatorship approval, no mention of me, no mention of Henry. just square footage and excellent investment potential. I didn't call. I didn't write. I folded the listing twice and placed it under the cufflink box. The W was nearly gone. But I remembered how he signed cards to me to be from W always. I didn't speak aloud. There was no one left to interrupt me anyway. Some things survive longer in silence than in sound. I hadn't touched the key since the morning Henry gave it to me. His office drawer, second from the bottom, marked with a red sticker and the faint outline of a thumbprint smudged into the brass. I turned it over now like a decision. It didn't gleam. It never had. The clerk at the bank took the papers without hesitation. No questions. Edgar had already prepared them signatures clauses, the updated power of attorney, the trust amendment. My name stood alone on every line now. No co-signers. No beneficiaries beneath mine. Just a quiet handover of something I'd never truly held. At home, Eli stood barefoot at the door of what used to be Henry's workshop. He didn't ask to move in. He simply placed his backpack at the threshold and waited until I nodded. The windows were still covered in dust, and one of Henry's magnifying visors hung on a hook above the desk. Eli never took it down. The calls started the following evening. First Caroline, then Grant. Then a number I didn't recognize, likely Brian, using someone else's phone again. I didn't answer. The machine picked up and played the same 3 tones I'd recorded years ago, Henry reading a recipe out loud and forgetting the oven temperature. "You're being ridiculous, Mother. I brought Lily because she misses you. That's all." I met them at the door with an envelope. I didn't step aside. "She cried last night. She said, 'Why doesn't Grandma call me anymore?'" What should I tell her? The paper inside wasn't long. It held 3 paragraphs, all written in Edgar's even type. One line was mine: "I still love you, but I no longer believe you, and love cannot live where trust has no air." Caroline didn't open it in front of me. She folded it in half, then in quarters. Lily held a pink headband in one hand and a stuffed turtle in the other. I touched neither. When they turned to go, Lily looked back once, not at me at the crack where the door had been. Later that night, I pulled the family photo from the hallway wall. It had hung in the same spot since our 30th anniversary, a staged image with everyone arranged by height and temperament. I slid the back panel open and removed the print. Henry's image came loose in my hand. The rest I left in the frame. I didn't shatter glass. I didn't tear paper. I found a small box, the kind that once held Christmas cards, and placed the other photos inside one by one without pause. Caroline's graduation, Grant's wedding, Brian as a baby squinting at sunlight. They didn't resist the move. Their glossy faces slid down into the cardboard without sound. Henry's photo I kept on my nightstand. The edge was bent from years of being shifted around. His tie was crooked, his collar slightly wilted. He had always hated ironing. Eli came home late that evening. His shoes were muddy. He left them by the back door without a word. I noticed he had started using Henry's old kettle, the one that squealed instead of whistling. The lid never sat quite right, but he filled it anyway. There was a message from Grant waiting on the machine. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign the documents and we'll walk away. No court, no drama." He didn't mention my name or Henry's, only documents. The next morning, I moved the safe box from the hall closet to the kitchen. It fit underneath the old oak bench Henry used when tying his shoes. I changed the combination. Eli never asked for it. I found myself waking earlier, sometimes before dawn. The light hit the corner of the kitchen in a way I hadn't noticed before. Dust drifted across the linoleum like it had somewhere to go. I didn't sweep it. At the grocery store, a woman asked if I wanted to donate to a holiday fund. I nodded, then gave my name as Barbara Weston. She looked at the screen. There's a Barbara Whitaker listed already. That you? I shook my head. No relation. She didn't press it. Most people don't when the answer arrives flat and without punctuation. Later, Eli asked if I wanted help decorating the small tree he found at the farmer's market. I told him to hang only the wooden ornaments, the ones Henry made with Lily one summer when she still called me Grandma and not Barbara. Eli didn't ask why. He placed them carefully, pausing at the carved bird with the cracked wing. That night, I lit one candle and left the rest unburned. The box of matches held only 4 left. I didn't strike a second. I found myself returning to the same page in Henry's notebook, page 19, where he had scrawled in pen, "Don't forget, love doesn't erase suspicion. It only waits for the silence to pass." I hadn't understood it then. Now I didn't need to. I didn't burn anything. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I simply chose not to answer the door again. And when the wind hit the shutters that evening, I listened without turning toward it. Not because I feared what it carried, but because I already knew what I would no longer open for. I don't remember locking the front door that last time. I must have out of habit, but the sound didn't stay with me. Eli carried the last of the boxes into the small cabin just after dusk. I didn't tell him, but I recognized the way the wood floor dipped in the kitchen. Henry had marked it with blue chalk the first spring we visited. He'd thought we could level it ourselves. We never did. "I think this lamp still works," Eli said. He nudged the switch, and a pale circle of light touched the window pane. "It's warmer than I expected." I nodded. The heater was slow, but the air didn't press against the skin like it had at the old house, thick with filtered silence. He found the little cast iron kettle and held it up. "Tea." I moved to fill it. The faucet clicked. I noticed the thin film of rust around the spout, the kind that never really goes away. Eli whistled softly behind me. I heard him lift something from the bookshelf. "There's a lockbox behind this frame." He didn't ask if I wanted to open it. Inside was the ring. The gold had dulled in the grooves. I turned it over between my fingers, not sliding it on, just weighing it. Next to it, a notebook. The first line in Henry's handwriting read, "If you're reading this, it means they failed." I didn't speak. Eli leaned over and read silently. He tapped one page. "Did you know he wrote this for you?" The sentence was underlined. "No one owns the rest of your life, not even the ones we taught to love." I closed the notebook slowly. The sound of the spine folding shut was sharper than I expected. Eli looked at me the way children do when they're not sure if they've broken something. "We could fix the place up if you want." "There's nothing to fix," I said. "Only things to stop pretending." He looked back toward the porch. "I never asked why here." This was supposed to be where we ended up, not in luxury, just where we remembered who we were. There was a pause. I watched him pick at the label of the tea box. He folded his arms then. "Do you think they'll come here? I doubt they even know the address." He looked relieved, then almost guilty for that. Later, while he cleaned the small window near the pantry, he called out, "I found an old Polaroid tucked behind the shelf. You and Henry in front of that boat, Maggie Lynn. I think it says I took it from him." The image was faded, but I remembered the moment. My hair had been tied with a red ribbon. Henry had insisted we name the boat after his mother. "They looked different back then," Eli said. I didn't answer. He stepped closer. "I mean, your eyes looked more awake." I set the photo face down on the counter. "You should rest. We'll clean more tomorrow." The next morning, I folded each photo from the last house into envelopes. I labeled none of them. I placed them in the back drawer of the kitchen hutch beneath old linen napkins. There was no ceremony, only placement. When the tea kettle whistled, I poured 2 mugs, then placed one by the window where Eli sat with his sketch pad. He pointed to the horizon. That tree line curves just like the one in your wedding photo. I looked. Henry thought it looked like a bishop's crook. Eli smiled. He was always looking for signs. He also thought squirrels could understand intention. We both let out a sound, not quite laughter, but close. He walked to the fireplace and adjusted the logs. I used to think family meant permanence, like if you were born into it, nothing could undo it. Paper, Ken, I said. So can silence. He nodded. They kept calling. I blocked them. They'll find ways around that. Do you want me to talk to them? No. He looked at the floor. What if they come here? They won't come for you. They already took what they wanted. He let out a breath. I don't even know if I'm allowed to feel anything about them anymore. You're allowed to feel what's real. His voice lowered. And what if I still wanted them to love me? I walked to the cupboard. I took out 2 plates, set them on the table, then poured honey into a chipped bowl. I once brought Caroline a birthday cake I'd made from scratch, I said. I hand-piped her name on it. I paused. She scraped the icing off and said, "Store-bought would have been cleaner." I remember the way the light hit the knife in her hand. It reflected off the frosting like it was glass. Eli watched me. He didn't speak. I broke a piece of bread, handed half to him. He took it. You never told me that before. There are things you only say once. He nodded. So, what do we do now? We wait for the kettle to whistle again, and then we drink the tea. He chuckled quietly. That's it. That's more than enough. I watched him settle into the chair near the window pencil, back in hand, shading a small pine tree. The ring lay on the table beside me. I didn't wear it. I didn't put it away. The notebook was closed, but I remembered the last page. It read, "If the world forgets your name, write it in the dirt with your finger. You don't need ink to exist." I folded the towel on the counter, laid it over the sink and smoothed it flat. Then I sat down beside the window and said nothing at all. It's strange what silence sharpens. I used to think noise was what dulled the senses, but it's absence that slices more precisely. 2 months passed. Not one message. Then the call came. I let it ring until the voicemail caught it. Grant's voice thin and rehearsed. Mom, we've been talking. We think it's time we made things right. The family's not whole without you. Behind him, a keyboard clicked. Another voice, low and clipped, muttered something legal. I didn't call back. Instead, I placed the phone face down and turned the kettle off before it screamed. A letter came the next morning, sealed in the familiar cream envelope of the county court. I didn't open it right away. It waited on the kitchen table beside a jar of marmalade Eli had made last week. He'd labeled it orange, not sweet in shaky marker. When I finally slid the paper free, I recognized Caroline's attorney's letterhead. She was appealing again. This time, not to take control of the estate, but to void my signature on the trust transfer. Her claim diminished capacity. I blinked at the word, then folded the paper neatly along its crease. I wore the cardigan Henry once patched at the elbows. The stitches had loosened. I didn't fix them. Later that week, Eli knocked once before stepping in. Grant called me, he said, placing his phone on the counter. He asked if I thought you'd be willing to meet. Said it's important. I waited. He didn't press. Instead, he returned to the porch, where his unfinished canvas leaned sideways in the breeze. The brushstrokes were soft around the edges now, like he'd painted air instead of shape. Saturday came. I was slicing lemons for tea when I saw a car I recognized. Too clean for this part of the county. Eli met them before they reached the door. I watched from behind the curtains, the ones I sewed, when Lily was still small enough to nap on my chest. Caroline had brought a woman with her, Microphone clipped to her collar, notepad poised. She stayed 2 steps behind, careful not to dirty her shoes. Barbara home. Caroline tilted her chin, like always. Eli's voice didn't rise. The woman you used to call Mother, she doesn't do encore performances. He closed the door before she could answer. The following Monday, a manila envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a copy of a news article, Estranged Family Seeks Reconciliation. The photo showed Caroline standing outside my home, arms folded, smile polite, but not honest. Her eyes missed the camera. I clipped the article and set it next to the tea kettle. The headline curled inward from the steam. That night, I sat with Eli while he arranged old screws by size on a cloth napkin. He said nothing. I watched his hands move in rhythm like memory lived in his knuckles. A few days later, another letter came. This one from the firm handling Henry's old pension. They'd flagged a forged authorization form dated the month before he passed. Brian's signature had been traced over Henry's name. The ink bled at the edges. I placed it next to the court letter. Paper didn't weigh much, but it sank the drawer like stone. The next week, I received a box in the mail, no sender. Inside was a stack of photos, me, Henry, the children, each one duplicated, then cut to remove my image. I picked one up. My left hand still showed resting on the shoulder of a child, cropped clean from the frame. On the back, one of them had written, "It was never about you." I burned the photo, but not the message. I didn't ask Eli who he thought sent it. He watched the smoke rise in silence. The lawyer called. Edgar. His voice came through clear but tired. "They're building a case against Eli now," he said, "claiming you were coerced, that he's taking advantage." I didn't flinch. I simply traced the rim of my teacup with one finger, watching the liquid settle. Later that week, Eli printed a copy of his adoption record. Quietly left it beside my reading glasses. It was dated 20 years ago. Caroline's name appeared nowhere on the paperwork. I asked nothing. That Friday, Caroline came again, this time alone. She stood at the bottom step and didn't knock. I saw her waiting hands buried in the pockets of a coat I once gave her for college. I opened the window. She looked up. "I miss how things used to be." I didn't respond. "I know you think we're all just trying to get something, but we're family, Mom. You don't throw that away." I let the screen fall back in place. She stayed a minute longer, then she left. I kept the front door locked that night, not because of fear, but because I had finally remembered that not every visitor is owed an entry. On Sunday morning, I found the newspaper wedged between the porch rails. The headline featured Caroline again, this time holding a framed photo of our family. My face turned away, caught mid-laugh. The caption read, "Daughter seeks healing with estranged mother." I cut the article out with the same scissors Henry once used to trim his ties. As I trimmed the border, I noticed a curl at the edge of the photo just over my shoulder. It looked like Eli's brushstroke. But this time, it didn't blur. I pinned it to the wall beside Henry's old watch, not as a reminder, but as a marker of where performance ends. They hadn't come back for me. They came because they noticed I hadn't. I used to believe that stillness meant emptiness. Now I know it can be something else entirely. I arrive early to the library, though no one asks me to. The key they gave me feels lighter than it should. I shelve returned books before the doors open, making sure the spines face forward and no sticker peels at the corners. The children's hour begins at 10. Some days I read aloud. Other days I simply listen to them stumble over words, catching the rhythm of a story, as if it were a skipping stone. I no longer wear my wedding band. It left a faint circle on my finger that hasn't faded, but I've stopped noticing. The ring now rests in a small cedar box. Beside the receipts, I've kept from building this new Life grocery. Total's gas station slips a folded application to the local food co-op. I didn't realize I'd been saving proof that I could live within my means until I found them arranged that way, like evidence in a quiet case I no longer needed to win. Eli comes home later these days. He leaves his backpack near the front door and forgets his shoes in the hallway. I don't remind him. There's charcoal on his wrists and the smell of turpentine clinging to his sleeves. He eats standing up. Once, he left a sketch on the kitchen table, just a corner of our porch, rendered in black and pale green. Below it, in his handwriting, not by blood, but home. I didn't frame it. I pinned it to the inside of the pantry, just above the shelf, where I keep tea bags and a worn notebook I use for budgeting. Some things aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be kept close. I've started planting tomatoes and herbs in pots that line the edge of the porch. I watered them with measured care, at first unsure of their limits. Now I press my fingers into the soil without gloves. I let my hands stain. I watch the leaves curl in sleep and unfold again each morning. They grow because I do not ask them to be more than what they are. Last week, Eli received a letter from the Community Foundation, a scholarship. He opened it without ceremony as if it were a coupon. I told him to keep it in a safe place. He looked at me as if to say, everything here already is. At night, I no longer count how many hours I sleep. I stopped measuring rest as though it owed me something. Some evenings I sit by the fire and knit half of something, then undo it. The sound of the yarn unraveling is quieter than people think. The text came on a Thursday. Grant's name blinked at the top of the screen, followed by words that seemed trimmed down for speed. If you sign the care admission papers, lawyer says we may restore inheritance eligibility. I reread the message once then again. I felt for a pen not to reply, but to sign something else. I'd been meaning to finish a revocation form. No more medical power of attorney. No more shared legal standing. I scanned it, sent it back. No explanation, no salutation, just the form. The next day I sorted the house papers again. I found a lease agreement I had drafted months ago just in case. It wasn't needed anymore, but I placed it in the drawer with my bank ledgers. I drew a line under last month's entries. Underneath, I wrote sufficient. That was the first time I used the word in ink. At the market, a woman from town asked if I'd heard from my children. I folded my receipt neatly before answering. They're well, I said, busy. She smiled too long. I hope they come visit soon. No one wants to be alone at our age. I didn't respond. I reached for my change, counted it twice, and left the apples behind. They were bruised. Eli and I rarely speak about what happened. We eat what we grow, and when the water leaks from the porch roof, we patch it with whatever we can find. There's a kind of dignity in fixing something without waiting for someone else to notice it's broken. Caroline sent an envelope last week. It wasn't handwritten. The return address was typed impersonal. Inside a Christmas photo, all smiles, matching sweaters, a caption on the back, still hoping we can make peace. I cut the photo into quarters and used the blank sides as bookmarks. None of them have held my place in any book I've read since. One morning, while sorting through papers in the kitchen, I found a grocery list in Henry's handwriting, years old, tucked into an old cookbook I hadn't opened since we moved here. Chicken broth, thyme, yellow onions. At the bottom, in his sharp, upright scrawl, home is what's left when they stop pretending to care. That evening, I crossed out a date on the calendar, Grant's birthday. I replaced it with mail, Eli's portfolio. We sat by the fire later that night. I poured tea into the same mug I'd once chipped in the sink and never replaced. Eli looked up from his sketchpad and said, "You seem quieter than usual." I stirred my tea once, then twice. "Not quiet," I said. "Just full." He didn't ask what I meant. He just nodded as if he already knew. Before bed, I opened the pantry and looked at the drawing again. The ink had smudged slightly where I'd touched it with damp fingers weeks before. I didn't smooth it out. I let the wrinkle stay. It looked like a wave passing through the corner of our house. I turned off the kitchen light and stood by the doorway for a long time. Not waiting, just being. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of wood. These were the things that stayed. I remember once fearing the idea of dying alone. That used to be the worst-case ending I could imagine. Now I fear something else entirely. I fear waking up one morning and realizing I've lived my whole life never becoming myself. I folded the form again. This time not to send, just to feel the crease hold. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. But I knew I am not who I was, and I am never going back. I used to think closure came with a conversation, a final word, a moment of shared silence. But doors don't always need to close with a click. I walked to the bank alone. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to feel the weight of my own footsteps. I brought nothing but the folder in my bag. Inside, a notarized letter, 2 forms of ID, and the last connection I had to the people who once called me Mom. The clerk looked young. Too young to understand that I'm here to close some accounts sometimes means more than finance. I handed her the papers one by one. These 3 accounts were co-managed. She began scanning the document. You'll lose visibility into... I understand, I interrupted. I signed my name slowly, deliberately. Not out of hesitation, but precision. My signature didn't tremble, not even once. She clicked through her screen. Do you want to leave a reason for the closure? I shook my head. She waited too long before accepting it, like she thought I might change my mind. People often mistake delay for doubt. I stepped out into the air and walked across town to Lowell's office. Edgar greeted me with the same raised brow he always used when Henry brought home stray animals. I placed the new documents on his desk. He didn't ask questions. The scholarship fund, I said, adjusting the folded sleeves of my cardigan, will be in both Henry's and Eli's names. No others. He tapped his pen on the desk once. Understood. We finalized the terms. A small renewable fund. Prioritizing students without legal guardians. Those like Eli, unclaimed but not unloved. I had 3 envelopes left to deliver. The first one held the old family album. I had removed each photo carefully, almost reverently, until only empty frames remained. Their outlines were still visible on the paper, like ghosts that no longer answered when called. The second envelope contained a legal form, a renunciation of inheritance. Not theirs, but mine. I signed away any claim to what they might offer later, should the tides turn. Beneath the signature line I had written in blue ink, I refuse to receive what was never truly given. The third held a scan of the revised will, names struck through in red ink. Only Eli remained, and the scholarship fund. No footnotes, no appeals. The house I once called home still stood tall, smug in its symmetry. Its windows like closed eyes that refused to look back. I didn't knock. I slipped the envelopes under the mat. The corners of one caught the breeze and lifted slightly, like they might change their mind and return to me. But I didn't bend down to press them back. A black car pulled into the driveway as I turned away. I didn't look to see who stepped out. Barbara, a voice called. Grant's. Or maybe Brian's. That tone half command, half question, the kind they used when they wanted something dressed as concern. I didn't pause. I just want to talk. Shoes on gravel. A hand reaching for a shoulder that no longer belonged to him. You can't just walk away. You're still our mother. I kept walking. The sound of the envelopes being picked up, the sharp rip of paper. "You're doing this to punish us?" I didn't answer. I kept my hands steady by my sides. "We made mistakes, but that doesn't mean you can erase us." There it was. Erase. As if I had the power to undo them. As if silence was vengeance. One more step. 2. The click of the gate behind me. A metal sound I'd once hated, too final, too cold. Now I didn't mind it. By the time I reached the main road, I felt lighter. Not empty, just lighter. I passed a bakery Henry used to stop at every Sunday. I paused outside the window, watching the clerk pack cinnamon rolls into a paper box for a woman holding a child. The woman said nothing. The child smiled. I had no craving for sweets. I simply stood and watched. Later at home, Eli was in the garden fixing the small stone markers we'd painted together last month. One read patience, the other enough. I poured myself tea and closed the leather notebook I'd been using to track my finances. I wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. Freedom isn't loud. It just doesn't ask for permission. My wedding ring sat beside the mug, its gold dulled, one side slightly warped from years of wear. I still touched it sometimes like a reflex, but I hadn't worn it in weeks. The fireplace crackled. Not grand, just steady. Eli came in with dirt on his hands and a question in his eyes, the kind he didn't always voice. I nodded once, the way Henry used to when words weren't enough. We ate in silence. He handed me a sketch, a small cabin in spring trees bare, but reaching the porch light on. "Do you like it?" I didn't answer immediately. I took the drawing and placed it on the mantel beside the frame that used to hold all our family portraits. That frame now held a pressed leaf from our garden, its stem slightly split. I didn't leave them. I whispered more to the air than to Eli. I just stopped waiting to be found. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. I never understood how silence could grow into something so whole. The tea leaves crackled slightly as I poured the hot water, the steam curling above the chipped rim of Henry's old mug. I'd kept it even when most everything else had been boxed or burned or forgotten. The inside still held a faint ring at the bottom, from mornings that felt borrowed more than lived. On the kitchen table, I laid out a stack of unopened envelopes, each one addressed in a familiar hand. Some had been bent. Others frayed at the edges like they'd traveled too far without purpose. I didn't read them. I tied them together with a gray ribbon from an old coat box and slipped them inside Henry's wooden case, the one with the velvet lining and the faint scent of cedar. The latch clicked softly. That sound always reminded me of him closing his workbench drawer at night, as if even his quiet deserved a ritual. Eli came into the room, wearing the jacket I'd mended last fall, the one with the stitched elbow and paint on the cuffs. He stood for a moment, shifting the weight of his backpack from one shoulder to the other. "I packed everything, I think." His voice was low, almost like he didn't want to disturb the floorboards. I nodded. "It's your first train ride alone." "I still don't get it," he murmured, avoiding my eyes. "Why me? Why not someone who fits the picture better?" I refolded the tea towel in my hands. "Because family isn't proof. It's practice." He hesitated in the doorway. "Grant once said I was a placeholder, that I'd disappear once your real family came back." I handed him a small envelope. Inside was his first rent check from the scholarship fund. My handwriting across it was firm, deliberate. "They did come back," I said. "But not for me. You stayed for no reason at all." His shoulders dropped. "That's a reason, the only one that ever mattered." We walked to the porch together. The sky was still soft at the edges, lavender folding into pale blue, the lake catching its breath. He hugged me without ceremony, as if it had been years already. His fingers lingered on the hem of my sweater, the same way Henry's used to when we danced in the kitchen music off feet, slow. "All right," he said. "Don't. Just live." He laughed quietly and headed down the gravel path. His bag bounced against his side. He turned once halfway down and lifted his hand in a crooked wave. I didn't wave back. I just watched until the trees took him. I sat in the old rocker that used to belong to Henry's mother. The wood had worn to my shape now. I opened a small notebook and looked at the list I'd made the week after I moved here. Most of it had been crossed out. Re-register the will. Close the bank links, sell the apartment, change the emergency contacts. But at the bottom, one line had never been touched. Learn to be alone without apology. Inside the house, the wind nudged the sheer curtain aside. The lavender bunch I'd dried last year still hung near the window. I'd forgotten how faint it had become until the breeze stirred it back to life. Later that day, I found the slip of paper I'd written in ink and tucked into the drawer by the phone. I lit a match, not to destroy, but to remember the letting go. The words disappeared before the flame even reached the edge. Barbara Whitaker, mother of Caroline Grant Bryan. Ash settled into the grain of the porch wood like a final signature I didn't need. The phone rang just once. I didn't move to answer it. That night, while the kettle sang, I found myself reaching for the ledger I used to balance the household bills. I flipped through the pages past the columns and dates, the check marks, and scribbled notes. I stopped at the last page. In a hand more deliberate than usual, I wrote one sentence I have spent more years being known than being seen. I tore it out and folded it neatly, slipping it into the hollow of the Henry box beside the ribboned letters. Not hidden, just resting. The next morning, a letter came from the city, an official stamp. I already knew what it was. The paperwork confirming that Eli's name had been added to the property. I didn't frame it. I just filed it behind the pantry receipts. By the weekend, the tomatoes in my small garden had started turning. I picked them one by one, wiping them gently with the cloth I used only on Sundays. As I worked, a neighbor's voice drifted faintly over the hedge. Something about a wedding next door. Something about grandchildren flying in. I smiled and pressed a cut tomato between my fingers, letting the juice fall back into the earth. On Sunday evening, I lit a candle for no occasion. No visitors, no cause. Just the way the flame leaned toward the open window made it enough. My tea had grown cold. I drank it anyway. I folded one of Henry's handkerchiefs, the one with the stitched H in the corner, and laid it beside the ledger. Then I reached for the new will, opened it briefly, then shut it again without reading. It had done its job. No one needed to be reminded twice that they'd been removed. And I no longer needed to prove I'd survived their absence. The wind had shifted. I left the door open. I used to wake hoping to be remembered. Now I rise just to remember who I am, and that's enough.